What would you do if you were driving down a dark, empty highway and saw a small child standing all alone on the shoulder? For a veteran American trucker driving his 18-wheeler through the vast Nevada desert, this was no hypothetical question. It was 2 in the morning, and what he first thought was a shadow slowly took the shape of something impossible. Stay with me until the end, because the heartwarming truth of what happened on that lonely road might just restore your faith in humanity. His split-second decision in the middle of nowhere would change everything. His name was John Sullivan, but everyone on the road just called him Sully. With over 1 million miles under his belt, he was the kind of seasoned trucker who could read the highway like a book. But this chapter was one he had never seen before. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever been in a situation where you had to trust a complete stranger, or be that stranger for someone else? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories are what build this incredible community. And if this story is already hitting home for you, hitting that like button tells us we are on the right track and helps these heartwarming moments reach more people. Your support is the fuel that keeps this channel on the road. Now subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because the choice Sully makes in the next few seconds is the most important one of his life. As his air brakes hissed, cutting through the dead silence of the night, the giant of a man stepped down from his cab. He was moving west on Interstate 80, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the absolute blackness of the Nevada high desert. The cab of his Peterbilt 389 was his kingdom, a bubble of humming engine, glowing gauges, and the faint smell of stale coffee and clean diesel. To a man like John Sully Sullivan, a man with 2 decades and 1 million miles of road behind him, the night wasn't a time for sleep. It was simply the other half of the workday, a quieter, lonelier half where the world shrank to the twin beams of his headlights punching a hole in the darkness. The journey was his life, a constant forward motion that kept the past in the rearview mirror. His mindset was one of precision and routine. Check the mirrors, watch the temperature gauge, listen to the rhythm of the Cummins engine, a deep thrumming heartbeat that he knew better than his own. Out here, complacency could be fatal. You learned to notice things that were out of place, a flicker of movement on the horizon, the dark shape of a blown tire on the shoulder. It was a skill honed by years of solitude and focus. And that's when he saw it. At first, it was just a smudge in the distance, a slight imperfection at the edge of his vision where the pale white line of the shoulder met the sagebrush. His initial trucker's instinct cataloged it instantly. Coyote, maybe a young deer frozen in the lights. It happened all the time. Animals were a constant, unpredictable variable in his world. He didn't even lift his foot from the accelerator. But as his rig ate up the yards, the image refused to resolve itself correctly. The shape was wrong. It was too small, too vertical. A deer would have bolted by now. A coyote would be a low-slung shadow, gone in a flash. This was just a static shape against the vast, empty canvas of the night. A quiet alarm, a subtle dissonance in the symphony of the road, began to sound in his mind. The transformation from a routine drive to a high-alert situation was instantaneous. His hand, which had been resting loosely on the gear shifter, now gripped it tightly. Every ounce of his experience, every late night, and every close call was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment reveals a hidden truth about the men and women who live their lives on these highways. Their journey isn't just about moving freight from point A to point B. It's about navigating a world that most people only see through a car window at 70 miles an hour. The real behind the scenes of this life is a constant state of awareness, and the decisions made in a split second can have a life-altering impact. For Sully, this was no longer about a delivery schedule in Chicago. This was about the single, terrifying shape that was now clearly visible in the throe of his high beams. It was a revelation that chilled him to the bone, a sight so out of context that his mind struggled to process it. The empty road, his sanctuary of solitude, had just presented him with an impossible, heart-stopping reality. This single moment was the start of a profound internal shift, a collision between the hardened professional trucker and the core of the man himself. All the miles, all the lonely nights were just a prelude to this one. The true weight of his journey was about to be measured not in tons of cargo, but by the choice he was about to make, a choice that would define everything he was and everything he thought he knew about the open road. The sheer size of his 18-wheeler, a symbol of power and dominance on the asphalt, suddenly felt like a fragile shell against the enormity of what he was witnessing. The world had gone silent, and all that existed was the man, his machine, and the tiny, unbelievable silhouette waiting in the darkness ahead. This was the kind of truth that doesn't show up on a GPS, a moment that changes your entire mental landscape. Forever. Comment below with the words human instinct if you can feel the shift that just happened in Sully's world. To understand the impact of what Sully was seeing, you have to understand the man behind the wheel. John Sullivan wasn't a talker. His face was a roadmap of his life, etched with lines from the sun and the wind, from squinting into a million sunrises and sunsets. He was a man made of quiet competence and a kind of rugged grace that you only find in people who have spent their lives in a solitary profession. He was one of the best, a true professional whose authority on the road was earned, not given. But there was a hidden truth sitting right there on his dashboard, a constant, silent passenger on his long journey. It was a faded photograph tucked into the trim, a picture of a smiling woman and a boy in a baseball cap who was now a grown man with a life of his own. That photo represented both his home and the reason he was so often away from it. The highway, for Sully, was a complicated place. It was his livelihood, his sanctuary, and his escape. It was the only place where the noise of the world and the louder noise of his own memories could be drowned out by the steady drone of the engine and the rhythm of the rolling tires. The solitude of the cab was a heavy blanket he had learned to wear. It was his constant companion, a presence so familiar that he had long ago stopped fighting it and simply accepted it as part of the job, part of his very existence. His entire mindset was built around this reality. He was a lone wolf, self-reliant, a king in a kingdom of chrome and steel. But the truth is, no one chooses that kind of profound loneliness without a reason. The road gave him purpose and a paycheck, but it also gave him distance. And for years, that distance was exactly what he thought he needed. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because to truly grasp the transformation that was beginning to unfold, you have to look at the behind the scenes of a life like Sully's. This isn't just about a man driving a truck. This is about the walls we build around ourselves and the unexpected moments that come along and threaten to tear them all down. For 2 decades, Sully's decisions had been tactical, professional. Which route to take, when to stop for fuel, how to manage his logbook. They were choices based on logic and experience. But the decision he was making now, as he eased his foot off the accelerator and onto the brake, was not coming from the professional trucker. It was coming from a place he had kept dormant for a very long time. It was coming from the man in the photograph on the dashboard. This single, unbelievable sight on the side of the road was a revelation, an earthquake that shook the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The impact was immediate and visceral. The solitude that had been his shield for so long suddenly felt like a cage. The endless empty road that had been his escape was now the scene of a drama he could not drive away from. All his training, all his experience had prepared him for mechanical failures, for bad weather, for every conceivable danger of the highway. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. This was a test of a different kind of strength. It was a test of humanity. The truth that was being revealed to him in that moment was that no matter how far you drive, you can never truly escape who you are. The father, the husband, the man who knows the difference between right and wrong. His entire journey up to this point, all the lonely miles and silent nights, was now converging on this one critical choice. The man who embraced solitude was about to face a situation that would require the deepest kind of human connection. The lone wolf was about to become a protector. Type 1 right thing in the comments if you believe one single action can define an entire life. The hiss of the air brakes was a sound of surrender. Sully's foot, acting on pure instinct, pressed down with a practiced firmness, beginning the delicate and powerful process of bringing 80,000 pounds of rolling steel to a halt. They, giant of the road, his Peterbilt 389, groaned in protest as it fought its own momentum. This was a controlled, professional action, but inside the cab, Sully's mind was in absolute chaos. As the truck slowed, the powerful throw of his high beams solidified the impossible image. It was not a trick of the light. It was not a strange desert plant or a discarded piece of trash. It was a child. A little girl, to be exact, standing ramrod straight on the dusty shoulder. She was wearing what looked like pink pajamas, the kind with little feet now covered in dust. And clutched to her chest with both hands was a small, well-loved teddy bear, its button eyes seeming to stare right back into the blinding lights of the rig. For a long, frozen second, Sully's brain refused to process the data his eyes were sending it. The disconnect was so profound, so utterly jarring, that it felt like a physical blow. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, settled in his stomach. In the trucker's lexicon, the vocabulary of things that can kill you, there were many entries. Black ice on a mountain pass. A sudden tire blowout at 70 miles per hour. A reckless driver in a four-wheeler swerving into his lane. He had faced them all. He had the training, the experience, and the mental fortitude to handle those threats. But there was no chapter in any manual for this. There was no protocol, no checklist. Nothing in his entire life on the road had prepared him for the sight of a little girl, alone in the vast, predatory darkness of the American desert. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment, the moment a man's professional world collides with a deeply human crisis, reveals a hidden truth about our own capacity. We all have a default mentality, a way of operating that gets us through the day. For Sully, it was the stoic, solitary trucker. But life has a way of presenting us with revelations that shatter that default. The impact of this sight was a complete system reset. It bypassed the trucker and went straight to the core of the man. The shock wasn't just about the strangeness of it all. It was a profound and terrifying recognition of vulnerability. His own, and more importantly, hers. This wasn't a problem to be solved with a tool or a phone call to dispatch. This was a situation that required a part of himself he had kept locked away for years. The journey of the next few minutes would be more challenging than any mountain pass he had ever climbed. It was a journey across the 10 feet of pavement that separated his world from hers. A final, powerful hiss of the air brakes was like an exhale from the world itself, leaving behind a silence that was absolute and deafening. The only sound was the low rumble of the idling engine and the frantic pounding of Sully's own heart. He killed the high beams, leaving just the running. Lights on, softening the harsh glare. Then he moved. Every action was slow, deliberate, calculated. He unbuckled his seatbelt. He pushed open the heavy door of the cab, which groaned in the quiet. He swung his large frame out and planted his work boots on the top step, then the bottom, then finally onto the gravel of the shoulder. He was a big man, tall and broad, and he was acutely aware of the intimidating shadow he must be casting. In his world, size was an asset, a presence that commanded respect. But right now, his size felt like a liability, a potential source of more fear for a child who was already living a nightmare. He stood there for a moment beside his massive truck, a giant of a man next to a giant of a machine, his mind racing. The little girl hadn't moved. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, a tiny, solitary figure, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. That stillness was somehow more unsettling than tears would have been. It spoke of a level of shock that had gone beyond panic. Sully began to walk toward her, keeping his movements slow and his hands visible at his sides. The crunch of his boots on the gravel sounded like gunshots in the silence. He stopped about 15 feet away, not wanting to crowd her. Then, in a single fluid motion that spoke volumes, the big trucker lowered himself down, first to one knee, then to both, until he was kneeling on the cold, hard shoulder of Interstate 80. It was an act of surrender, an intentional decision to make himself smaller, less threatening. He brought himself down to her level, a giant owing to a small child. The action was pure, unadulterated instinct, the instinct of a father. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice, normally a low rumble accustomed to cutting through, the noise of a truck stop diner, was unbelievably soft. He said, "Hey there, sweetie. Are you lost? I'm John." In that one moment, the entire narrative of his life shifted. The hardened, solitary trucker disappeared, and in his place was just John, a man on his knees in the middle of the desert, offering the only thing he had that mattered, a little bit of kindness. This single decision, this one act of raw humanity, was the true turning point of his entire journey. The fear in the air didn't vanish, but it was now met with a competing force. Hope. Write the protector in the comments if you believe that deep down. The instinct to help is in all of us. The little girl, who he would soon learn was named Lily, stared at the kneeling giant for a long moment. The fear in her eyes was still there, but it was now joined by a flicker of curiosity. A connection had been made. Then, in a voice so small it was almost swallowed by the vast desert night, she delivered the first clue. Mommy went to get help. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Sully's mind, accustomed to processing logistics and road conditions, was now forced to decipher this fragment of a child's story. Lily furrowed her brow, searching for the right words a 5-year-old uses to explain a catastrophe. "The car is sleepy," she added, and with that she lifted a small, trembling arm and pointed her finger out into the oppressive darkness, away from the comforting glow of the truck. Sleepy car. Mommy went to get help. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Sully's head with horrifying clarity, and a fresh wave of cold dread washed over him. A sleepy car meant a broken-down vehicle, stranded somewhere back in the blackness she was pointing to. And a mother who went for help was a woman walking alone on a dangerous, unlit interstate, a vulnerable target for any number of threats. He stared into the void where Lily's finger pointed. There was nothing to see but an endless stretch of black. But now he knew. The empty road wasn't empty at all. It contained a child, a broken-down car, and a mother who was walking into the unknown. The entire situation had just transformed from a shocking discovery into a full-blown crisis with multiple lives on the line. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we are witnessing here is the hidden truth behind a promise, and the incredible, crushing weight it can carry. The entire framework of this little girl's world was built on the last words her mother had said to her: "Stay here. It's safe." In her 5-year-old mind, this was an absolute directive, a sacred vow she had to keep. The impact of that promise was the only thing keeping her rooted to that spot, preventing her from wandering into the road or into the desert. It was both her anchor and her prison. This was the behind the scenes of a parent's most desperate decision. The mother's choice was a gamble born of panic and a fierce, protective love. In her mind, leaving her daughter in one spot seemed safer than dragging her along on a dangerous, uncertain journey on foot. The revelation for Sully was that he had just stumbled into the middle of this high-stakes gamble. He was now an unwilling participant in a story that had begun long before he arrived. His entire journey, his schedule, his destination, it all became irrelevant in that instant. The simple, linear path of his life had just been shattered into a complex, terrifying new reality. The transformation in his mentality was seismic. He was no longer just a man who had found a child. He was now the sole guardian of that child's trust and the only hope for her missing mother. His decisions from this point forward would have an impact that could mean the difference between life and death. The solitude he had cultivated for so long was a luxury he could no longer afford. He was now tethered to this family by a bond of circumstance and a profound sense of duty. The weight of Lily's promise to her mother had now transferred to him. He had to honor it. He had to make it right. He looked from Lily's small, trusting face to the impenetrable darkness she had pointed into, and he felt the full scale of the responsibility settle onto his broad shoulders. He was no longer just a trucker passing through. He was the only help there was. Write the Promise Keeper in the comments if you know that trust is the most powerful thing in the world. In that moment, a profound and irreversible transformation occurred within John Sullivan. The complex web of logistics, schedules, deadlines, and company policies that had governed his life for 20 years simply evaporated. The 40 tons of freight in his trailer, destined for a warehouse in Chicago, ceased to have any meaning. It was just dead weight. A new mission, raw and urgent, had just overridden all other directives. The only thing that mattered was the little girl with the teddy bear and her mother, who was somewhere out in the wild darkness. This was a decision that required no debate, no weighing of pros and cons. It was an absolute, a moral imperative that rose from the deepest part of his soul. He looked at Lily, still watching him with those huge, solemn eyes, and a new kind of strength flowed through him. He rose from his knees, his movements no longer hesitant, but filled with a powerful sense of purpose. He had a job to do. He climbed back up into the high cab of his Peterbilt, the familiar space now feeling completely different. It was no longer a bubble of solitude. It had become an impromptu command center, the nerve center of a rescue operation. He reached for the coiled cord of his CB radio microphone, a tool he typically used for casual chatter about speed traps or road conditions. He keyed the mic, and his voice, now steady and clear, cut through the static. "This is Big Sully on I-80 westbound. I have a situation here." It was a simple statement, but on the airwaves of the highway, it was a signal flare. It was a call to the unseen brotherhood of the road, letting any other driver within range know that something serious was happening. But he didn't wait for a reply. He immediately grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was a calm presence in the storm of his thoughts, and Sully, drawing on his professional training, delivered the information with precision. He gave his exact mile marker. He described Lily. He explained what she had told him about her mother and the sleepy car, and the direction she had pointed. His cab, once a place of escape from the world, was now the world's most important connection point to this unfolding tragedy. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this is where we see the hidden truth about what it means to take responsibility. A hero isn't someone with superpowers. A hero is an ordinary person who, in a critical moment, makes the decision to put the well-being of another human being above their own. This was Sully's moment of revelation. We're seeing the behind the scenes of a life-altering choice. The journey he was on was no longer measured in miles, but in the seconds ticking by on the dashboard clock. The impact of this one decision, to stop, to get involved, to take command, had set in motion a chain of events that could not be reversed. This was a complete transformation of his purpose. He was no longer a driver for a logistics company. He was a first responder, a guardian. His entire mindset had to shift from passive observer to active participant. All the rules he lived by, the ones about staying on schedule and avoiding trouble, were thrown out the window. A new, more fundamental rule had taken over. You do not leave people behind. The truth is, the cargo in his trailer was insured. It could be replaced. But the lives of this mother and child were priceless and irreplaceable. That was the simple, powerful calculus that was now guiding his every move. The weight of his new responsibility was immense, but it wasn't a burden. It was a source of focus, a reason. He was no longer just a man on a lonely road. He was a man. With the Mission.Right command center in the comments, if you believe that true leadership is just stepping up when it's needed most. After the call ended, a new kind of silence descended upon the cab. The emergency was now in motion, but the immediate reality was still just him and this small, shivering child on the shoulder. He knew he couldn't leave her out there. Gently, he spoke to her through the open door. "Hey there, sweetie. It's pretty cold out here. Do you want to come up into the truck where it's warm? I have the heater going." He watched as she processed. His words, her small face a mixture of fear and consideration. For her, climbing into that massive machine must have been like stepping onto an alien spacecraft. But his gentle tone, the kindness he had already shown by kneeling, had built a fragile bridge of trust. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Sully moved slowly, climbing down again and walking over to her. He scooped her up in one arm. She was featherlight, all pajamas and trembling bones, and she clutched her teddy bear to her chest as if it were a life preserver. He carried her to the passenger side and carefully lifted her up, placing her gently onto the big, comfortable, air-ride seat that had been his only companion for countless hours. He wrapped his own jacket, which had been lying on the seat, around her small frame. It smelled of diesel, coffee, and the open road, but it was warm. He climbed back into the driver's seat and looked at her. Her wide eyes were taking in the panorama of the cab, the glowing gauges, the switches, the vast windshield that looked out onto the dark world. From his personal stash of supplies, he pulled out a bottle of water and a chocolate bar, the kind he kept for a late-night energy boost. He handed them to her. She took them with small, hesitant hands, her focus immediately shifting to the simple, comforting task of unwrapping the chocolate. For a few precious seconds, she wasn't a lost child in the desert. She was just a little girl with a piece of candy. And Sully wasn't a trucker on a deadline. He was just a man, watching over her, his heart aching with a mix of terror and a fierce, unfamiliar protectiveness. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a hidden truth in these quiet moments of waiting. The crisis is ongoing. The danger is still very real, but the human journey momentarily shifts from action to connection. This is the behind the scenes of a tragedy, the small, intimate interactions that become the foundation for hope. The real transformation happens not just in the big decisions, but in the small acts of compassion. For Sully, this was a complete change in his operational mindset. His focus narrowed from the massive scope of the problem to the immediate needs of the tiny person sitting next to him. And in that small, warm cab, surrounded by the immense and dangerous darkness, a tiny island of safety was formed. Then, far in the distance, a new light appeared. It wasn't the steady headlight of an approaching vehicle. It was a flicker of red and blue, a pulsating star on the horizon. Help! The impact of that sight was immediate and powerful. It was a revelation in the darkness, proof that his call had been heard, that they were no longer alone in this. The lights grew steadily brighter, sweeping across the desert sagebrush, painting the side of his truck in rhythmic flashes of color. A Nevada Highway Patrol cruiser pulled up behind his rig, its professional and official presence a stark contrast to the raw emotion of the scene. A trooper stepped out, his face illuminated by the flashing lights, his expression calm and serious. Sully opened his door and met him on the ground, quickly and quietly relaying the entire story. The trooper listened intently, his gaze shifting from Sully to the warm cab where Lily was safely tucked away. The search began immediately. The trooper's spotlight began to methodically scan the darkness where Lily had pointed, cutting a sharp, white cone through the blackness, searching for any sign of a person or a disabled car. Every minute that crawled by felt like an hour. The quiet crackle of the police radio was the only sound that broke the tension. Sully stood by his truck, a helpless observer now that the official machine of search and rescue had taken over. All he could do was wait, his eyes fixed on that probing beam of light, his entire being focused on a single, desperate hope for a reunion in the desert night. Right. The longest night in the comments if you know the feeling of waiting for news. That could change everything. The wait was a physical thing, a heavy pressure in the air. The sweeping beam of the trooper's spotlight seemed to be searching an entire universe of blackness. Sully's own journey had come to a dead stop on the side of this highway. His entire existence narrowed to the fate of a family he didn't even know. He paced back and forth, a caged lion beside his rig, his eyes glued to the distant light, praying for it to stop, to find something, anything. Inside the cab, Lily had fallen into a fitful chocolate-smeared sleep, her small chest rising and falling in the soft glow of the dashboard. She was safe, for now, but her mother was still out there. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one ratcheting up the tension. Then, the police radio, which had been a quiet stream of indecipherable codes and static, crackled to life. With a new urgency, the trooper by the cruiser stiffened, listening intently. Sully couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the change in tone. Something had happened. The trooper turned and walked toward Sully, his face illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights. "We found her," he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of relief. The words hit Sully with the force of a physical blow, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. The trooper continued, "She's about 2 miles up the road. She fell into a ditch, twisted her ankle pretty bad. She couldn't walk, couldn't get back to the road to flag anyone down. She's okay, just shaken up and hurt. They're bringing her here now. She's okay." The 2 words echoed in Sully's mind. A life-threatening situation had resolved itself into a simple, manageable injury. The worst-case scenarios that had been playing on a loop in his head for the past hour dissolved into nothing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this is the emotional payoff. This is the hidden truth behind why good people make hard decisions. It's not for a reward or for recognition. The real prize is this feeling, this profound, soul-shaking relief when you learn that your actions had a positive impact. This is the behind the scenes of what it means to be a hero. It's not the grand gesture, but the quiet moment when you realize everything is going to be all right. The transformation of the entire scene was instantaneous. The desolate stretch of highway, which moments before had been a place of immense tension and fear, was now a sanctuary, a place of imminent reunion. The journey of these 2 separate lives, a mother and a trucker, had violently intersected, creating a crisis that was now reaching its heartfelt conclusion. A few minutes later, another set of headlights appeared, this time coming from the direction of the search. As the second patrol car pulled up, Sully's gaze was fixed on the passenger door. It opened, and a state trooper carefully helped the woman out. She was limping badly, her face pale and streaked with tears and dirt, but her eyes were scanning the scene with a frantic energy. They swept past the police cars, past the massive grille of the Peterbilt, and then they locked onto the passenger window of the cab. And she saw her. The mother's composure completely broke. A cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief and love, escaped her lips. At the sound of her mother's voice, Lily woke up. Her head popped up over the dashboard, her eyes wide. "Mommy!" she yelled. Sully quickly moved to the passenger side, opened the door, and gently lifted the little girl down onto the ground. The moment her feet hit the gravel, she was off, running as fast as her little legs could carry her. The mother, ignoring her own pain, hobbled forward, her arms outstretched. And then they collided. The mother fell to her knees, wrapping her daughter in an embrace so tight it seemed she was trying to merge them back into one person. Her sobs were loud now, the desperate, ragged cries of a parent who had stared into the abyss of losing her child and had been pulled back from the edge. Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her small arms wrapped around her neck. In that one powerful embrace, all the fear, all the darkness, and all the loneliness of the night was erased, healed by the simple, profound power of a mother's. Love.write the embrace in the comments if you believe one moment of love can fix a world of fear. Sully stood back, a silent observer in the wash of the red and blue flashing lights. He watched the raw, powerful reunion, a scene so intimate he felt like he should look away, but he couldn't. This embrace was the resolution, the emotional payoff for the gut-wrenching tension of the past hour. This was the reason he had stopped. He was an outsider to their family, a stranger who had drifted into their lives for a brief, terrifying moment, but he was the anchor that had made this reunion possible. After a long time, the mother, still holding her daughter's hand, looked up. Her eyes, red from crying, but shining with a fierce light, found him. She gently disentangled herself from Lily, and, with the help of a state trooper, limped over to where Sully was standing beside the grill of his truck. She looked up at this large, quiet man, and her face crumpled again with a fresh wave of overwhelming gratitude. "You," she started, her voice choked with emotion. "You're the one who found her. I don't know what to say. You saved her. You saved my daughter's life. You're an angel." An angel on the highway. Sully was deeply uncomfortable. He was a man who dealt in concrete things, in mile markers, and fuel gauges, and shipping manifests. This raw, powerful emotion was a language he wasn't fluent in. He shuffled his feet on the gravel, his gaze falling to the ground for a moment. Before meeting hers again, he saw the sincerity in her eyes, the life debt she felt she owed him. He shook his head, not dismissively, but with a deep, humble sincerity of his own. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble, "we truckers look out for each other on the road. Tonight, your family was part of that road." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a profound philosophy. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this moment contains the hidden truth of the anonymous hero. This is the behind the scenes of true character. Sully's decision to deflect the praise, to shift the focus from himself to a collective, is a powerful revelation about his mindset. The real transformation for him wasn't becoming a hero. It was simply acting on a code that had been written on his heart over 1,000,000 miles of solitary roads. This trucker's code is an unspoken agreement among the men and women who live their lives in these machines. It's a promise to be the eyes and ears for one another, to stop for a fellow driver in need, to be a protector of the lonely stretches of asphalt they all share. The impact of this code is that it turns 1,000,000 individual journeys into one. single, interconnected community. Sully didn't see himself as an angel. He saw himself as just one small part of that system, a system that, tonight, had worked perfectly. He was just the guy who happened to be there. Paramedics arrived, a new set of official lights joining the scene. They began to tend to the mother's ankle, their professional calm taking over. The family was safe, cared for, and on their way to being whole again. Sully saw that his part in this story was over. The mother tried to ask for his name, his address, wanting to repay him somehow, but he just gave her a small, kind smile and another shake of his head. "Seeing you and your little girl back together," he said, "that's all the payment I'll ever need." And with that, he gave a final nod to the trooper, turned his back on the emotional scene, and climbed up into the familiar comfort of his cab. Door closed with a solid thud, sealing him back inside his world. He fired up the engine, its powerful roar a familiar song. He released the air brakes with a loud hiss, put the big rig in gear, and without a single look back, he pulled away. From the shoulder, his taillights disappearing into the same darkness from which he had emerged. His journey to Chicago had just resumed, but the man making that journey was not the same one who had driven this stretch of road an hour ago. Outright. The trucker's code in the comments, if you believe the best acts of kindness are the ones that expect nothing in return. As Sully's Peterbilt merged back onto the empty interstate, the flashing red and blue lights of the rescue scene shrinking in his rearview mirror until they were just a single, pulsing star, the cab of his truck felt different. It was the same space, the same worn driver's seat, the same faint smell of coffee. But the profound solitude that had defined his world for 2 decades was gone. The silence was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of a small child's trusting eyes, the sound of a mother's relieved sobs, and the weight of a simple act of human decency. The road ahead, a familiar ribbon of asphalt he had traveled thousands of times, looked different too. It no longer seemed like just an endless, lonely stretch of pavement separating one place from another. It felt alive now, a place of profound and unpredictable possibility. The vast, dark desert on either side didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt watchful, like a silent witness to the small miracle that had just unfolded. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon, changing the absolute black to a deep indigo, Sully realized that the journey ahead of him had fundamentally changed. The destination was still Chicago, but the purpose of the drive had been rewritten. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the hidden truth of this story lies not in the rescue, but in the quiet, internal transformation of the man driving away from it. The real, lasting impact of that night was imprinted on Sully's very soul. The behind the scenes of his life was a man who had used the road to build walls around his heart. But a 5-year-old girl with a teddy bear had just walked right through them without even trying. This was the ultimate revelation of his long journey. For years, his mindset had been one of forward motion, of leaving the past behind. But tonight, by stopping, by getting involved, by connecting with the raw vulnerability of another human being, he hadn't just saved a family. He had saved a part of himself he didn't even know was lost. The decisions he would make from now on about everything would be filtered through the memory of this night. He glanced at the faded photograph on his dashboard, the one of his wife and son. For so long, it had been a symbol of a life he was separate from. But now, in the soft light of the rising sun, it looked like a promise, a destination. His entire journey, all the million lonely miles, suddenly felt less like an escape and more like a long, winding road back to the man he was supposed to be. He was still hauling 40 tons of freight, but he had picked up a new, infinitely more precious cargo. In that vast and empty landscape of Nevada, a trucker was not just transporting goods. He was carrying hope. And that is the most precious cargo of all. Write the precious cargo in the comments if you believe the most important journeys are the ones that change us on the inside. Stories like Sully's happen every single day on the back roads and interstates of America, often unseen and unheard. They remind us that sometimes the biggest hearts are found inside the biggest trucks. If this story resonated with you and you felt that connection, hitting the like button is the simplest way to signal that these are the moments worth sharing. And if you're still here with me on this journey, all the way to the end, just right, I'm carrying the hope in the comments below. It means a lot to know who travels this road with us. We explore powerful stories of human connection like this one every single week. If you value that and want to make sure you never miss a journey, subscribing to the channel is the best way to stay connected with our community. There's actually a video right here on the screen that explores what happened when another trucker found something he never expected. Click on it and let's continue the journey together.